There is a certain stillness that only comes at twilight, when the world slows to a hush, and shadows stretch across wooden floors like forgotten dots. It's in this hush that we begin tonight's tale, the story of a woman who chose silence over society, solitude over salons, and wrote more in whispers than others ever could in shouts. Emily Dickinson. A name stitched into the fabric of American poetry like a white thread through black cloth. A recluse. A mystery. A genius. Or perhaps just a quiet woman with a very noisy soul. She was born in 1830, in the sleepy town of Amherst, Massachusetts, a place of carriages, gardens, and starched collars, where lives were measured by seasons, letters, and the sound of church bells tolling noon. Emily grew up in a house full of books and expectation. Her father, Edward Dickinson, was a lawyer, a politician, a man of structure and ambition. Her mother, distant, reserved, more shadow than presence. And Emily? She was the one who didn't quite fit in, and didn't quite care to. By the time she was in her 30s, Emily had become something of a legend in her own lifetime. Not because she published poems. No, she barely did. Not because she traveled, or spoke in public, or courted fame. Quite the opposite. Emily Dickinson became known because she disappeared. She stopped leaving her house. Then, she stopped leaving her room. She wore only white, and often spoke to guests through a slightly open door. Her neighbors wondered. Her family adjusted. The town whispered. And in that upper room of the Dickinson homestead, Emily, unseen and often unheard, wrote nearly 1,800 poems. Each one like a feather falling in a storm, quiet, delicate, but impossible to ignore. They were poems about death, nature, time, love, and God. But also about bees and frogs, and the curve of a summer cloud. They were short, sometimes no longer than a sigh, but they held the entire universe in their silence. She wrote on scraps of paper, the backs of envelopes, chocolate wrappers, old bills. She stitched some into little booklets. Most she never showed to anyone. And so we wonder, who was this woman who refused to leave her house, and yet saw everything? What kind of life is lived within four walls, and why did she choose it? Tonight, dear dreamer, we will walk, ever so softly, through the corridors of her days. We'll peek into her habits, her routines, her secret rebellions. Not to disturb her, no, never that. But to feel what she felt, to understand how a single room can become a universe, and how a woman, nearly invisible to her world, could become immortal to ours. So fluff your pillow, pull the blanket close, and let the lamplight flicker gently. And before we begin, if you enjoy wandering through forgotten lives and whispered histories, I invite you to subscribe, like, share, and leave a comment below. Tell me, where are you listening from? And what time is it where you are right now? Because I know that you, me, and everyone else tuned into this video, we all share the same little habit, even if we're scattered across the world, far from one another. We all love to fall asleep to stories. Imagine, if you will, a morning in 1855 in Amherst, Massachusetts. The air smells of damp grass and lilac. Dew clings to the edges of each leaf like a secret. And at the corner of Main Street, a large brick house with white trim begins to stir. This is the Dickinson homestead, a sturdy, Federal-style house with a wide porch, high ceilings, and windows that drink in the light like old souls remembering. Inside, footsteps echo faintly on wooden floors polished by time. The house breathes with quiet discipline, a place of books, rituals, and unspoken rules. Emily, not yet wearing her later uniform of white, rises early. Her hair is often pinned hastily, her dress simple, her expression alert but distant, like someone always halfway into another thought. The household keeps time by the ticking of clocks and the preparation of meals. Lavinia, her younger sister, handles much of the day's domestic rhythm. Their mother, by now withdrawn and delicate in health, rarely leaves her room. The kitchen is where day first takes shape. Emily is no stranger here. In fact, she's known to bake her bread, her gingerbread, her black cake, all beloved by family and even the neighborhood children who sometimes find treats tied with string over the gate. There is something quietly maternal in this morning labor, as though in kneading flour she finds the exact same comfort as in shaping a stanza. But make no mistake, while her hands are busy, her mind is elsewhere. She moves through these early hours with the grace of someone who listens to things others do not hear. The particular sigh of the kettle, the rhythm of birdsong outside the pantry window, the way light spells across the floor in slanted beams like poetic meter. There are letters to be read, of course. The Dickinsons are a family of correspondents. Emily's letters, even from her youth, read like tiny works of literature, playful and strange and saturated with wit. She writes to friends, to cousins, to Susan, dear Susan Gilbert, in whom she finds a lifelong source of passion, admiration, and complexity. Morning is a quiet exhale for Emily. It's when the world is still drowsy and hasn't yet asked her to perform. She does not write yet. No, not just yet. First, she observes. She collects. She watches how a bee stumbles over a rose or how the cat positions herself in a sunbeam. She does not name these things as inspirations, but they find their way into her verses nonetheless. And as the rest of Amherst begins its routines, men off to work, women to church meetings, children to lessons, Emily remains inside, moving between rooms with a kind of spectral grace. She is seen, but rarely stopped. Heard, but not interrupted. Already, the boundary between her and the outside world is blurring. And so, dear dreamer, her day begins, not with announcements or demands, but with a kind of ritual silence. The kind of silence that listens back. And so, as the morning hush fades into the distant tolling of the noon bell, another layer of her story begins to unfold. As the sun climbs gently toward its highest point, casting soft gold across the clavered walls of the Dickinson home, Emily is drawn, almost magnetically, toward the outside. Not the town, not the streets, but the garden. Her garden. Though she rarely left the property, the world did not feel small to her. For within the hedges and flower beds just beyond the kitchen door, Emily discovered something vast. A wild cathedral of petals and pollinators, dew and decay. She moved through it like a quiet priestess, blessing each stem with her gaze. She was not simply a poet, dear dreamer. She was a botanist in her own right. From a young age, Emily had cultivated her own herbarium, a collection of pressed plants with meticulous Latin labels, bound like a sacred text. Each page was a sermon of curiosity and care. She studied flora not only for their beauty, but for their patterns, their lifespans, their secrets. The garden, in these sacred midday hours, became her refuge and her classroom. She knew the names of things, not just their common monikers, but their deeper, older, stranger names. Columbine, Monarda, Calceolaria. The words themselves were poetry, even before she turned them into verse. She would stoop to inspect the way an iris curled or how a spider web glinted like lace in the sun. Neighbors might catch a glimpse of her through the trees, standing still as a statue in her apron, her gaze fixed on something unseen to most, a flicker of movement, the shimmer of wings, the slow unfurling of a bloom. What Emily saw in her garden was not mere decoration. It was metaphor. It was life's brevity made visible. It was death's soft hand in the curling of a leaf. And it was eternity in the moment a bee dove headfirst into a daffodil. She wrote of flowers often, not sentimentally, but with awe and almost philosophical weight. To make a prairie, she wrote once, it takes a clover and one bee. One clover and a bee. And reverie. The reverie alone will do, if bees are few. And so, her garden was not just a patch of earth. It was her cosmos, her daily devotion, her argument with God. Emily did not tend the roses so they would be admired. She tended them because they reminded her that time was both precious and irrelevant. That beauty fades, yes, but also returns. That things can be reborn without ever having been known. At times, she would gather clippings, tuck them into her pockets, press them into books, or send them, lovingly, to Susan. They were not just tokens of affection. They were messages, codes, little green poems without ink. By the time the sun had started to descend, the garden glowed with warmth and fatigue. Bees slowed, shadows lengthened, and Emily, gently brushing the soil from her fingertips, would slip quietly back indoors, not with the air of someone retreating, but of someone fulfilled. The outside world had not been visited, but it had been understood, in a way that few ever truly manage. And so, as the garden folds back into silence, another door opens in the day of our gentle recluse. Afternoons in the Dickinson house were marked by quiet industry. The sounds were subtle. The creak of a chair, the soft scratch of a pen, the rustle of muslin skirts brushing along polished floorboards. It was a house where words were always in the air, sometimes spoken, more often written. For Emily, afternoon was the sacred hour of correspondence. She did not take letters lightly. Each envelope she sent was a small, trembling ship, launched into the uncertain seas of friendship, longing, and poetic ambiguity. Her letters were not merely news or pleasantries. They were performances, dances, little storms in ink. Sometimes playful, sometimes devastatingly intense, they were written in that singular voice of hers, at once cryptic and piercingly clear. She wrote often to Susan Gilbert Dickinson, her sister-in-law, her confidante, her muse. The exact nature of their relationship remains a mystery, cloaked in fragments and suggestion, but there is no doubt that Susan stirred something fierce and tender in Emily's soul. "Dear Sue," she once began, "do you know it is 2 years since I first saw you? I am thinking of you today, and always." And in another, more breathless note, "I cannot wait, feel as if I could die, if I should wait 1 minute more." Not all her letters were so direct. Many shimmered with irony, or concealed their aching truths and riddles. But each one was a tether, a way of reaching out from the rooms she rarely left, to lives and hearts she could not hold. She also wrote to editors, to friends, to her beloved mentor Thomas Wentworth Higginson, who would become a strange mix of literary guide and distant admirer. She often sent him poems for his opinion, though rarely took his advice. Afternoons were when she made her paper messes, folded sheets, scraps of discarded lines, drafts pinned together with straight pins or pressed between books. Her desk, if one could call it that, was modest. A small surface near a window, often strewn with paper, ribbon, perhaps a small vase of wildflowers. She sat there, rarely disturbed. The household had grown used to her rhythms. Guests were entertained by Lavinia or their father. Emily might write a note instead of appearing, or speak through the door, her voice low and calm, like a breeze behind curtains. Sometimes she sewed. She wasn't especially skilled at it, but the motion of her hands gave her thoughts room to wander. The repetitive act of mending or hemming mirrored her mind's own quiet repair work. In thread and paper, she found her peace. There is a profound beauty, dear dreamer, in this kind of solitude, not loneliness, but chosen stillness. To live quietly is not to live small. Emily's afternoons were wide as any ocean, filled with memory, wonder, yearning, and the delicate labor of turning life into language. And so, as the day begins to tilt toward dusk, and her pen rests briefly beside an unfinished verse, another moment unfolds in the gentle arc of her day. Evening in the Dickinson household came not with trumpets, but with a sigh. It arrived on soft shoes, creeping in through the tall windows and trailing long beams of amber light across the parlor floor. Outside, the town of Amherst settled into its quiet rituals. Lamps were lit, shutters closed, children called home from the fields. Inside, a slower magic took place. Emily always noticed this hour. For her, it was not the end of the day, but a transformation. The light changed. It lost its sharpness, became gentler, slanted, unsure of itself. It was, perhaps, the most poetic time of day, a time between certainties. She might sit near the west-facing window, her silhouette outlined by the descending sun, watching as the shadows of the maple trees danced on the walls like ghostly lace. Sometimes she would hum, not a tune you or I would recognize, but a low, repetitive sound, like a lullaby sung to the self. This was often when her thoughts turned inward, deeply and without apology. The distractions of the house had slowed. Her garden slept. The letters were sent. Now the mind could wander. She would read the Bible, yes, but also Shakespeare, Emerson, Elizabeth Barrett Browning. The Brontes, too, stirred something within her, a kinship of confinement and longing. And then there were the philosophers, the mystics, the scientists. Emily was never afraid to reach far beyond what a New England woman was expected to know. And yet, she remained rooted. Her body rarely left these rooms, these few acres. But her imagination drifted into dimensions unnamed. She would ponder eternity the way others might consider dinner plans. To shut our eyes is travel, she once wrote. And indeed, she traveled deeply at this hour. It was not uncommon for her to begin writing again, this time with more urgency, like catching butterflies at dusk. Her poems were rarely dated, often unsigned, written in pencil on scraps and margins. Some ended abruptly. Some were crossed out and rewritten sideways. Many were folded into bundles and hidden away in drawers. No ceremony, no titles, just the words. Pure, immediate, and unafraid. Sometimes Lavinia might knock gently to ask if she'd be joining for supper. Sometimes she would. Sometimes a note would be sent down the stairs, playful or evasive. Emily did not dislike company, she simply required space from it. She needed the kind of silence that allows thoughts to bloom undisturbed. Outside, the world dimmed. Inside, her candle was lit, not just for light, but as a companion. A tiny sun she could carry into the night. And as the flame flickered against her pale walls and the air cooled with the scent of pine and ink, Emily Dickinson sat very still, as if listening to something far away, something no one else could hear. And so, as the darkness gently falls and wraps its shawl around the old house on Main Street, another poem waits to be born. When the town had gone to bed, when Amherst grew silent enough to hear its own breathing, Emily Dickinson came most alive. In the hush of night, she became ungoverned. The boundaries of her room faded. Time softened, and the lamp's golden glow turned her walls into something sacred, the sanctuary of a soul at work. Her desk was not grand, a narrow writing table, sometimes her lap. The candle flame danced as if in response to each syllable, each pause, each sudden rush of thought. It was during these hours, when the rest of the world slumbered, that Emily gave birth to her most haunting verses. She did not write for applause. She did not write for legacy. She wrote because she had to, because something immense lived inside her, and paper was the only place large enough to hold it. Her poetry did not follow the rules of her time. It defied them. Lines would begin with a breath, and with a sigh. Dashes scattered like breadcrumbs through a forest of thought. Capital letters appeared mid-sentence like sudden bells ringing in a fog. She called her style my letter to the world that never wrote to me. Her themes were not polite, not the drawing room fare of domesticity and delicate affection expected of a woman. She wrote of death, not with dread, but with fascination. She wrote of madness, of immortality, of desires so intense it crackled between the lines like static. I heard a fly buzz when I died, she once penned, with eerie calm. And another time, wild nights, were I with thee. Wild nights should be our luxury. These were not the verses of a shrinking violet, dear dreamer. They were the cries of a thunderstorm muffled in cotton. They were intimacy written in code. Often she would pin her poems together, little fascicles stitched by hand. She shared a few with Susan. She sent others, nervously, to editors. But most she kept hidden, folded into the drawers of her desk like letters never sent. Imagine her now, the candle low, the room still, her pencil tapping softly against her lip. She's just finished a stanza, and she's reading it back aloud, almost under her breath. Not to impress, not even to be understood, but to hear the music of it, to see if it holds. Sometimes she would rise, pace the room, speak lines into the air, let the rhythm settle into her body. Writing, for Emily, was not an act of performance. It was communion with herself, with the divine, with whatever lived just beyond the veil of comprehension. And when the verse felt done, or as done as she allowed them to be, she would fold the paper, slide it into a bundle, and blow out the candle with a slow, measured breath. Darkness returned. But the poem had been written, and that, for her, was enough. And so, as the stars blink quietly over Amherst, and the ink dries beside her sleeping pen, another secret is added to the silence. There is a moment, just after the candle is blown out, when the room forgets it had ever known light. The shadows, long familiar, press gently against the walls, like memories too old to name. Emily lies in bed now, the quilt pulled up to her chin, her hair unpinned, her body stilled by the weight of silence. But her mind, dear dreamer, her mind is still walking. The room is small, but not cracked. It has held her for decades. The wallpaper is faded, the floorboards creak when the wind shifts, and her small bed sits beneath a window that frames the stars like they are always waiting for her to look up. She doesn't pray aloud, not in the conventional sense, but her thoughts reach upward, contemplative, tangled, full of questions. What is the soul? Why must we die? Where does love go when it is unspoken? She has asked these questions in her poems, over and over, like someone knocking on a locked door, not expecting an answer but needing to hear the sound. I'm nobody. Who are you? She once wrote. Are you nobody too? To be invisible, to be unseen, was not always a wound for Emily. Sometimes it was refuge, a form of power. If the world could not see her, it could not name her. If it could not name her, it could not tame her. And yet, there were nights like these, when the quiet grew too large, when the absence of voices pressed heavy on the chest, when she missed Susan, when she missed the self she might have been, had she walked through the world more boldly, or perhaps less tenderly. But regret was never her home. No, not Emily. She lived in the realm of wonder, of small things made immense by noticing. A cricket's song outside her window, the cool press of linen sheets, the sound of Lavinia's soft steps in the hallway, a memory of a letter, a line, a laugh. Sleep did not come easily, but it was not unwelcome. She lingered at its edge like one reluctant to leave a good book, not out of fear, but out of longing for just one more sentence. Some nights she'd rise again, light the candle, scribble a line on a waiting scrap. Just a fragment, a phrase. Then back to bed, as if nothing had happened. But the poem would wait for her in the morning. She believed, perhaps truly, that the soul does not sleep. That some part of us continues, even when the body rests. Perhaps that is why she welcomed the night. It allowed her truest self to move freely, unobserved. And so, dear dreamer, as the house settles into its final stillness and Emily's breath slows into the rhythm of dreams, the night holds her gently, like a favorite stanza remembered by heart. And as her story drifts softly into slumber, another begins to rise with the promise of dawn. And so the cycle begins again. Morning arrives not with a shout, but with a slow exhalation, as if the house itself is waking alongside her. The sun slips like warm breath through the pale curtains, brushing against books, the bedposts, the worn floorboards. Outside, the birds begin near him. Inside, Emily stirs. There is a quiet dignity to this repetition. The knowledge that the world turns, not because it must, but because it has learned to. And Emily, too, has learned the delicate choreography of her days. She rises, her small frame wrapped in a robe, her hair a wild tangle of sleep and thought. Her feet find the familiar cold of the floor. She does not rush. Emily never rushes. Time, to her, is not an enemy. It is a canvas. Downstairs, Lavinia is likely already tending to the morning tea. The kettle hums. Toast is prepared with silent efficiency. Their mother may call softly from her room, her voice echoing faintly through the stillness. Emily may join them briefly, offering a few dry observations, a half smile, perhaps even a line of poetry tucked between comments about the weather or the bread. Or she may not appear at all, choosing, instead, the solitude of her room, where the morning sun paints gold across her writing table. She will sit, breathe, open the drawer, reach for yesterday's poem, read it with the fresh eyes of a new day. Sometimes she will smile, just the small, satisfied curve of the lips. Other times she will sigh, pick up her pencil, and begin again. Words are living things to her. They shift, they change, they resist definition. Much like herself, she may pen new lines, born of dreams or morning reverie. She may revise old verses, as if gently brushing the dust from a treasured heirloom. Where she may simply sit, gaze out the window, and watch the wind move through the apple trees. The neighbors, by now, know not to expect her. The children speak of the lady in white who bakes them gingerbread but never appears. The postman leaves letters at the gate. Sometimes she answers. Sometimes she doesn't. She does not require the town's validation. Her world is enough. And yet, even in her solitude, Emily is not alone. The house is filled with ghosts, not the frightening kind, but those of memory, possibility, wonder. Her father's voice, stern and principled. The laughter of childhood games with Lavinia. The scent of old books, dried lavender, ink. This morning, like so many before and after, is both ordinary and holy. 1,000 such mornings would pass, each nearly identical. And yet, in each one, something was written. Something was thought. Something sacred, though unseen. Emily Dickinson, the woman who did not leave her house, continued to move the world, not through motion, but through meaning. And so, as the day begins its quiet bloom once again, another window opens into her ever-unfolding story. By mid-morning, the world outside Emily's window is fully awake. Horses clatter down the road. Neighbors greet one another on their porches. Church bells ring, lectures begin, and Amherst College bustles with youthful ambition. And yet, from the window of her upstairs room, Emily does not stir toward these things. She watches, but she does not follow. She listens, but does not answer. She is not being contrary, dear dreamer, nor is she afraid. Her absence is deliberate, an art form, a philosophy. There is something radical in her refusal to attend. She does not go to church, despite being raised in a deeply religious household. She does not visit friends, though they long for her presence. She does not appear at social events, or public readings, or weddings. She simply does not go. To others, this might seem strange, even rude. But to Emily, it is a quiet act of preservation. The world demands much, and she has chosen instead to listen to the quieter voice inside her. She once wrote, "Some keep the Sabbath going to church. I keep it staying at home, with a bobolink for a chorister, and an orchard for a dome." Her belief in the divine was not tied to pews or sermons. She found God in the slant of light on her windowsill, in the call of a morning dove, in the silent dignity of a tree standing through winter. To her, presence was not about place, it was about attention. And so, while the rest of Amherst attends its duties and obligations, Emily attends to something else entirely. The world as it is, unfiltered, unspoken. She writes in bursts, short, intense sessions where language pours out of her, uninvited and unedited. She does not wait for permission. She does not seek approval. She writes as if she's capturing something just about to vanish. The breath before a bird takes flight, the silence after a bell stops ringing. Her poems are, in many ways, her way of attending. They are her conversations with the universe, her presence made visible. They are her reply to the letters she never received. And sometimes, when the house is very still and the ink is still wet on the page, she'll pause, as if expecting someone to answer. Not with words, but with understanding. That understanding rarely comes in her lifetime. Only a few of her poems are published while she is alive. Most are heavily edited, stripped of her signature dashes and capital letters. The world is not ready for her yet. But she is not writing for the world as it is. She is writing for the world as it could be, quiet, aware, brave enough to notice what others overlook. And so, as the clock ticks on and Emily chooses once again not to go where she is expected, she remains, in the place where she is most needed, the center of her own, richly observed life. Noon in Amherst is a quiet kind of brightness, not blazing, not demanding, but steady and clean. The sun hangs high, casting long rectangles of light across the floors of the Dickinson home, warming the rooms like a familiar quilt. Emily is by the window now. Not standing, no, she prefers to sit in a small wooden chair, her back slightly curved, a folded letter in her hand. The room is silent but for the ticking of the parlor clock and the occasional creak of a floorboard upstairs. Somewhere, a bird sings one clear note, then falls still again. This is not a dramatic hour. There are no grand events, no epiphanies. And yet it is here, in this hush, that the very essence of her life takes shape. She is reading, or rereading. It may be a letter from Susan, written in that familiar hand that both comforts and unravels her. Or it could be from her mentor Higginson, full of cautious encouragement and mild suggestions. Or perhaps it is one of her own, folded and kept, a thought too private to send but too meaningful to destroy. Emily's letters, you see, are more than communication. They are mirrors. They are places where her feelings can go to stretch their legs, to try on new forms. And often, they return as poems. Near her, a piece of paper waits, already marked with a few fragments, a word circled twice, a line crossed out. The act of writing is not frantic, but it is urgent in its own quiet way. There's a sense that if she doesn't capture the thought now, it will dissolve, like mist at noon. Lavinia, her beloved sister, might pass by the door, offering a plate of something simple, a bit of bread or fruit. They don't always speak. Their communication has become a kind of shorthand. Glances, gestures, a brief smile. Lavinia does not pry. She doesn't need to. She understands the landscape of Emily's silence. The two sisters are deeply bound, not only by blood and shared walls, but by an unspoken agreement that Emily's space, her strangeness, her brilliance, must be protected. It is Lavinia who later ensures that Emily's poems, all those hundreds of unseen verses, are found and published. Without her, we might never have known them at all. But today, Lavinia says nothing. She simply sets down the plate and leaves the door ajar. Emily lifts her eyes, nods slightly, then returns to her paper. Outside, the leaves shimmer with heat. A bee floats past the open window. The world turns slowly. And Emily, in the stillness of her room, adds another line to a poem no one will read. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. And so, as the sun reaches its peak and shadows pause in their long, slow stretch, another moment of her quiet life becomes eternal. Afternoon in the Dickinson home is not filled with tasks, but with atmosphere. The house becomes a sanctuary, not by design, but by devotion. The devotion of a woman who has chosen to live fully within the borders of thought. It is this hour, dear dreamer, when time feels folded. Emily might be seated by the parlor window, a small cup of tea cradled in her hand. The tea is never extravagant, perhaps a simple green or chamomile, steeped slowly, sipped quietly. Her cup and saucer, delicate and slightly chipped, are like her poems, elegant in their imperfection. Sometimes Lavinia joins her. They sit together without needing to speak. Sisters who've become constellations in one another's orbit. Lavinia may do her mending, her stitching steady, methodical. Emily, in contrast, may simply watch, not out of boredom, but out of reverence. She has always revered the ordinary. To others, a teaspoon is just a utensil. To Emily, it is silver curled like a question mark, glinting in the sunlight. The thread Lavinia pulls through cloth is not just thread, it is a line connecting moments, women, generations. The breeze through the open window is not just weather, it is an invisible guest, bringing news from far beyond Amherst. She does not name these things aloud. There is no need. Everything, to her, carries the weight of metaphor. The tea is often accompanied by a biscuit or a slice of gingerbread. Yes, the same gingerbread that town children whisper about, the one tied in cloth and left hanging on her garden gate. It is her way of giving, small, anonymous, sweet. Today, perhaps, she opens a small drawer by the fireplace. Inside is a collection of ribbons, notes, clippings, pressed violets. Not for sentimentality's sake, but as a kind of index to emotion. A pressed flower can recall a whole summer. A ribbon can summon the memory of a laugh long gone. She is not nostalgic in the typical way. She doesn't yearn to return. She simply wants to feel the weight of moments again. To run her fingers over them, like pages in a well-loved book. She may write during this hour, or she may simply think. Her thoughts are not idle. They are dense, slow-moving, luminous. Like honey in a jar left too long in the sun. Once she wrote, "A word is dead / when it is said / some say. / I say it just begins to live / that day." And so, her afternoons are filled with beginnings, quiet, unannounced, but infinitely alive. Outside, the shadows grow long. The air cools slightly. A dog barks down the lane. And Emily, having traced the edge of another thought, sets down her cup and folds her hands in her lap, not with finality, but with the calm of someone who knows the next poem is already forming. And so, as the day begins to sigh its way toward evening, another page turns softly. Twilight is not a time of day in Emily Dickinson's world. It is a mood, a breath, a veil drawn gently over the bright furniture of the mind. The sun does not so much set in Amherst as it lingers, reluctant, golden, and slow. In her upper room, Emily watches the light slip away. There is a particular stillness in this hour, the kind that feels like something is about to begin, or perhaps has just ended. A liminal hush. Birds have finished their singing. The garden settles. The leaves, once fluttering in sunlit gossip, now fall quiet, like guests who have stayed too long and grown suddenly shy. Emily feels it. She has always been drawn to thresholds, the moment between waking and sleep, between silence and sound, between the living and the dead. Twilight is such a threshold, tender and tremulous. She may stand by her window, hands clasped behind her back, eyes tracing the rooftops of Amherst as they grow soft and vague. Somewhere, a candle is lit in another house. A mother calls a child in from the yard. A bell rings, not loud, but enough to remind the world it is still being measured. She does not move much, and yet within her, a symphony of sensations unfolds. This is when memory often returns. Not in clear images, but in feelings. The way the air smelled on a summer evening when she was 15. The timbre of her father's voice when he read the paper aloud. The warmth of Susan's hand, once briefly held. These are not memories she writes about directly. No, she rarely does that. Instead, they echo in her poetry as mood, as rhythm, as metaphor. She once wrote, "This is the hour of lead, remembered if outlived. As freezing persons recollect the snow. First chill, then stupor, then the letting go. Not dramatic, no, but haunting, intimate. As if she placed her finger on the exact temperature of loss." In these moments, Emily may begin another poem, not with intention, but because the feeling insists on form. A line appears, unexpected and urgent, and she must catch it before it dissolves. She writes quickly in pencil, her handwriting slanting like wind-blown grass. Sometimes it ends in a dash. Sometimes it doesn't end at all. Her poetry is not written to be finished. It is written to hold what cannot be finished, the grief, the wonder, the questions too large for answers. As the sky turns lavender, then blue, then nearly black, she lays down her pencil and leans back in her chair. The room around her is dim. The only sound now is the faint whisper of wine through the shutters. She is not afraid of the dark. She walks beside it every day. And so, as twilight folds itself into night and the stars begin their slow blinking vigil above Amherst, another stanza is born, barely spoken, yet deeply felt. Night has come, gently as ever, and the rooms of the Dickinson house are hushed with a solemn kind of calm. The world has turned inward. The windows reflect only candlelight now, and the ticking of the clock is the loudest voice in the room. Emily sits curled in a small chair by her bedroom fire, when the season allows it, or simply near her writing table. Before her, a book lies open. She reads not for distraction, but for connection, to voices long gone, to ideas that cannot be stilled. Her taste in reading is vast and eclectic. She reads scripture, yes, not with the blind obedience expected of her, but with the precision of someone searching for something beyond doctrine. She reads Emerson, whose thoughts echo her own longing for the sacred in the self. She reads the Bronte sisters, finding in them the wild weather of emotion that New England teaches women to conceal. Sometimes, she returns to her beloved Shakespeare. His cadences echo in her bones. She does not need to read Hamlet to remember it. She is Hamlet in certain hours of self-questioning, of solitude, of seeing ghosts in the garden. There is a quiet rebellion in her reading. Women of her station and era were not expected to read widely, certainly not metaphysics, philosophy, the natural sciences. But Emily does. And more than that, she understands them on her own terms. She consumes ideas like she consumes the world around her, selectively, sharply, with great intimacy. Her faith, too, is her own. She was raised Calvinist, attended the required sermons, felt the chill of New England piety. But she could not, or would not, accept faith as a package. Her belief was deeper, more questioning. She once wrote, "Some keep the Sabbath going to church. I keep it staying at home." She never joined the church, never took the public pledge. For this, she was quietly pitied by some in her town. But Emily knew her own kind of worship, the liturgy of bees, the sermons of falling snow, the holiness of silence. Her room was her chapel, her books her psalms. And tonight, with the fire low and the candle flickering, she reads not just to pass time, but to understand time. To commune with the invisible, those authors and ancestors and ideas that walk beside her in the dim corridors of thought. She may stop, mid-passage, to jot something down, a phrase that strikes her, an image that stirs. These notes might become poems. Or they might remain just that, fragments. Glimmers. Necessary sparks. The house sleeps around her. But she remains awake a little longer, attending not to obligation, but to meaning. And so, as the night thickens and the words on the page begin to blur with dreams, Emily Dickinson turns the final page and sets her book aside. Not because she is finished, but because she is ready to dream. The candle burns low. Its golden circle has shrunk to a delicate pool of light, barely enough to illuminate the curve of Emily's cheek, or the lines of the last page she turned. The room, already quiet, has grown quieter still, wrapped in the kind of stillness that makes time itself feel paused. She sets her book down carefully, not with finality, but with tenderness, as though she's just placed a child to bed. Then she rises, slowly, so as not to wake the night, and moves toward her small bed. She slips beneath the quilt, which smells faintly of lavender and age, and pulls it to her chin with a practiced motion. It is a quilt her mother may have stitched long ago, back when affection was offered in fabric and food, rather than words. The sheets are cool. The pillow is thin. But Emily is not seeking comfort. She is seeking stillness. Or rather, she is preparing for it. Sleep, for her, is not just rest. It is a threshold, much like twilight. A place between the visible and the invisible. Between being and not being. She once wrote, "Sleep is supposed to be, by souls of sanity, the shutting of the eye." But for Emily, sleep is rarely simple. It is the stage upon which her mind becomes unmoored. A place where thoughts, no longer tethered by expectation, can roam freely. Where death might visit, not as terror, but as inquiry. Where a bee might speak, or a loved one long buried might offer a glance. She does not share her dreams. Not in her letters, not in her poems. But we sense them. In the way her lines often feel like they were written in the half-world between wake and sleep, with the logic of dreams and the rhythm of breath. "I'm going to sleep now," she once told Lavinia, or perhaps said to herself. And yet, we suspect she never really slept as others do. Even in sleep, she observed. She noticed. She collected fragments. Perhaps in the darkness, with her eyes closed, she returned to the garden in summer. Or walked the path behind the house where no one followed. Or heard Susan's voice, not in words, but in feeling. Perhaps she stood on the edge of a vast meadow, where the air itself seemed stitched with meaning, and the silence was full of things waiting to be written. The world outside is utterly still now. The stars will overhead in perfect indifference. The wind has dropped. The house makes no sound. And in this deep, dark silence, Emily Dickinson breathes, slowly, steadily, as if her body were preparing to dissolve into the very thoughts that made her. And so, dear dreamer, as she drifts into sleep, the kind of sleep only a poet truly knows, another poem unwritten hums softly in the dark. Dawn does not arrive all at once. It tiptoes. First, a faint shift in the air. Then, the softest thinning of night's darkness. Finally, a cool sigh of lavender and gold brushing against the curtains, kissing the floorboards, touching the sleeping hands of the poet who never truly slept. Emily stirs. She doesn't jolt awake. No, her waking is like the slow unfurling of a fern, like the way dew gathers on a petal without ever seeming to fall. She opens her eyes as if to confirm that the world has not ended in the night, though she's often wondered what it would feel like if it had. There is no alarm, no schedule. The town below may be rising with its chores and prayers and papers, but here, in this room, the day is not governed by clocks. It is governed by light, and instinct, and the rhythm of thought. She lies still for a while, her gaze on the ceiling or the fading shadows across her bed. Already, lines begin to form, not thoughts, exactly, but shapes. Colors. Feelings. Some will grow into poems. Others will vanish, like dreams do. She may reach for a notebook, one she keeps by the bed, and jot something quickly, before the spell breaks. She does not worry about grammar or clarity. Those things can come later, or not at all. What matters is the moment, the precise flicker of a thought before it hardens into language. Her bare feet find the floor. Cold wood, familiar creak. The air is shot with morning. A shawl is wrapped over her shoulders, white and worn soft from years of quiet use. She crosses the room, not in haste, but with purpose, and opens the window. The light pours in. It is not yet harsh. It is that earliest kind of light, the one that flatters everything it touches. Even the dust in the air looks holy. The garden below is still damp with dew. A cat moves between the hedges. A bird takes its first note and lets it hang in the air like a promise. Emily breathes it in. This is her favorite hour, not because it is dramatic, but because it is untouched. The day has not yet asked anything of her. The world is still full of permission. She may go down to the kitchen soon, or she may sit at her table, letting the light tell her what kind of day it will be. Will she bake? Will she read? Will she spend the morning revisiting the lines she scribbled in the dark? She does not know. And that, too, is part of the magic. Her life is not built on certainty. It is built on wonder, on the ability to greet each day not with expectation, but with openness. And so, as the sun rises just a little higher, and the house slowly begins to breathe again, Emily Dickinson stands at her window, already half in another poem. There are mornings, dear dreamer, when the very first thing she does, before the tea is brewed, before the window is opened fully, before Lavinia's steps echo down the stairs, is write. Not from obligation, not because she must, but because something has landed softly in her chest, a line, a sound, a strange turn of thought, and she must give it space. Her writing table is still as she left it. A blank scrap of paper waits like a faithful friend. The pencil is dull, but it will do. She does not begin with titles. Emily begins with breath. Her first words are never grand. Often they are questions. What if pain had a color? What if death were not an end? What if hope had feathers? There is no sound in the room but the scratch of graphite. Her handwriting is idiosyncratic, tall, slanted, scattered with dashes like stepping stones across a creek. It is not neat, but it is unmistakably hers. The poem takes form quickly, as though it has always existed and merely waited for her to be ready. Sometimes it is only 4 lines long. Sometimes it ends mid-thought. Sometimes it refuses to be finished, as if to say, "No, let the reader wander." This is not work to her. This is breath. She once wrote, "If I feel physically as if the top of my head were taken off, I know that is poetry." And there are mornings, like this one, when she finishes writing and simply sits. Not triumphant, not anxious, just still. She reads the lines back aloud, barely louder than a whisper. She wants to hear how they live outside of her mind. Success is counted sweetest slash by those who ne'er succeed. She murmurs, a truth so clean it feels like snow against the tongue. When the poem is done, she does not polish it. She folds it, places it with others, or perhaps she tucks it into a drawer, or pins it to another sheet. The world will not see it. Not now. But she has seen it, and that is enough. She may now go downstairs, take breakfast quietly with Lavinia, exchange a few soft words, or none at all. The house is waking in its usual, careful way. And yet this morning, like all others, is now marked. Not by date, not by calendar, but by verse. It is a day that contains a poem. And that, for Emily Dickinson, means the day is already holy. So, dear dreamer, as her pencil rests and her footsteps retreat toward the kitchen, soft and unassuming, another moment of invisible genius has quietly passed. By late morning, the house has begun its daily rhythm, slow, methodical, and almost entirely unseen by the world outside. This is not a place of clatter and commotion. No servants bustle here. No guests arrive unannounced. The Dickinson home is a house of silence, stitched with the gentle threads of repetition. And Emily, contrary to the myth of a ghostly recluse entirely detached from life, is often in motion. Not dramatically, not loudly, but present, engaged, watchful. Today, she is in the pantry. There are jars of preserves along the shelves, gooseberry, strawberry, quince. Rows of carefully labeled bottles, and tins of flour she herself sifted. She knows this pantry better than any editor knows her lines. The chores she does are never grand, but they are precise. Folding linen, polishing glass, measuring out spices for her famous gingerbread, the one children would find hanging on her gate like a secret blessing. There is something deeply poetic about the way she moves through these tasks. Not rushed, not resentful. She is not escaping her art by performing these rituals. She is inhabiting it. After all, what is poetry if not the careful selection of ingredients, the slow simmer of ideas, the shaping of something unseen into something lasting? She may pause mid-task, stare out the kitchen window for a few long moments, then disappear briefly, upstairs, to jot a thought that arrived in the smell of cinnamon, or the sound of flour falling like soft snow. Sometimes Lavinia joins her, sleeves rolled, hair pinned back, moving with that same quiet grace. The two do not chatter. They are beyond idle talk. They move together like pages in the same book, turning softly, thoughtfully, bound by rhythm and ritual. There are no hired hands in the kitchen today. Not because the family could not afford them, but because Emily would not want them. She does not wish to be watched. She does not wish to explain. Her domestic life, though invisible to outsiders, is vast in meaning. These walls, these rooms, are her territory, her paper, her chapel. Even the act of watering plants, of adjusting curtains to follow the sun, becomes part of a larger poem, one written not with ink, but with days. And so, when the biscuits are cooling, and the kettle has begun its soft chatter, and the afternoon light has begun to slant ever so slightly across the tiled floor, Emily sits for a moment. Not because she is tired, but because she is listening. There is something in the silence that wants to speak, and she has always known how to hear it. And so, as the warmth of the oven fades and the scent of vanilla lingers in the air, another stanza of her quiet, deliberate life settles gently into place. In most homes, early afternoon might be the hour when visitors arrive, with gloved hands and rehearsed pleasantries, baskets of preserves, or news from the village. But in the Dickinson house, the door remains mostly closed. Emily does not welcome callers. There was a time once when she did, when she was younger, when her dresses were still trim for company, when her voice, though always soft, had not yet begun to retreat entirely from public reach. But as the years passed, the space between herself and the world widened like a crack in winter ice. Not from bitterness, not from fear, from choice. She began, first, to avoid large gatherings, then church, then polite social calls, until, eventually, she spoke to most visitors from behind the door, or sent Lavinia in her place. To the townspeople of Amherst, it became a curiosity. The woman in white, the one who never leaves. Some whispered, some speculated, some pitied. But Emily? Emily watched it all from her upstairs window, amused. She did not feel she owed anyone her presence. To appear, she believed, was to perform. And she did not perform. Not in parlors. Not for admiration. Her most intimate visitors were few. Susan, always. Her beloved niece and nephew. Occasionally a friend from her younger days. Or Thomas Wentworth Higginson, that cautious editor who never quite understood her but tried. Even he, she often received from behind a door, or via notes left in the hall. But the absence of guests did not mean the absence of connection. Emily's correspondence was rich, passionate, fierce. Letters arrived almost daily. Some she answered with wit, others with riddles. Some she never answered at all, not out of neglect, but out of reverence for what could not be said. She once wrote, "This is my letter to the world, that never wrote to me." There is sorrow in that, but also liberation. And so, on this afternoon, the bell may ring. Someone may step lightly onto the porch. But Emily will not come to the door. She will not descend the stairs in her white dress, smoothing her hair, rehearsing polite exchanges. Instead, she will remain upstairs, her eye pressed gently to the curtain, watching the visitor wait, then turn, then go. She does not feel guilt. She feels relief. Because the poem she was writing still waits on her desk. The thought she was following still flickers in the corner of her mind. And the silence she so deeply needs has not been broken. To be present in her own life, wholly unobserved, is a kind of grace the world rarely understands. And so, as the front gate creaks closed and the house remains unchanged, another choice is quietly made. And the day, like her poem, continues, incomplete, unadorned, and entirely hers. There is a peculiar magic to the hours just before evening, that subtle tilt of time when the light, no longer sharp, becomes syrupy and soft, laying itself gently across banisters and windowsills. In Emily's upstairs room, the golden light spills across her writing table, illuminating not only the pages but the very dust that floats in the air, catching it like a snow globe in slow motion. This is when her room seems most alive. A shadow of the curtain sways gently on the floor, repeating its movement as if trying to recall a forgotten dance. Her pencil lies beside a folded poem, both untouched for now, both resting, as if in agreement that beauty, today, requires no adornment. Emily watches. She doesn't need to do anything. She simply lets the light arrive. She sees it as few others do. Not as decoration, not as background, but as participant. It is, in some way, a visitor she allows to enter freely. She has written often about light. Not the dramatic kind, but a certain slant. She calls it a slant of light that bruises, that enters the soul like a soundless bell. There's a certain slant of light, winter afternoons, that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. And this, dear dreamer, is that kind of hour. She might pick up a small object, a button, a dried flower, a ribbon once tied around a letter, and hold it in the light, turning it, studying the way it changes when the sun touches it. This, too, is a form of writing, without paper, without words. She may walk across the room and open the small case that holds her herbarium, the collection of pressed plants she began in childhood and never truly stopped tending. Each flower is a memory, a poem not yet written, a small rebellion against time. There is no urgency in this hour, no task to complete, no guest to impress. And yet, there is reverence. Every creak of the floor, every sigh of the wind through the slightly ajar window, every glint on the glass pane is part of her world, her scripture. She has trained her mind to listen where others ignore, to see what others forget. This is why she rarely leaves the house. Not because the world is uninteresting, but because here, within these few rooms, everything she needs is already unfolding, minute by minute, like a stanza made of sunlight and silence. As the light begins to fade, slipping further along the floor like the final line of a verse, Emily closes her eyes for a moment. Not to sleep, just to feel. To feel the hour pass through her, golden, slow, sacred. And so, as the shadows deepen and the soft blue of evening begins to settle on the eaves, another fleeting, perfect hour becomes part of the poem of her life. As the sky turns from gold to ash, and the warmth of the day slips gently into shadow, the Dickinson home begins its most intimate hour. The bustle of daylight is behind them now. In this quiet space before full night, the house breathes differently, deeper, slower, older. Emily steps into the parlor. It is not a formal affair. There is no fanfare, no announcement. Only the soft sound of Lavinia folding her embroidery and the steady tick of the mantel clock counting seconds like small pearls on a string. Their mother, quiet as always, may be seated in her favorite chair. Their father, if still alive in this moment we visit, would be reading or listening, his stern features softened by firelight. If not, his absence sits in the room like another piece of furniture, unspoken, but never unnoticed. Emily does not dominate the space. She enters like a hush, a living breath in the silence. There may be tea, or cider warmed on the stove. The clinking of porcelain becomes a kind of lullaby. Sometimes, a book is read aloud, Lavinia's voice gentle and sure. Sometimes, there is music from the small piano, its sound faint, like memory returning through the keyhole. But often, it is just presence. The Dickinsons are not a family that needs noise. They exist beside each other like chapters in a novel, not always connected by dialogue, but held together by a common story. Emily sits, hands folded in her lap, or perhaps one resting on the armrest, her gaze lingering on the fire. She is not idle. Inside, the world is turning. Her thoughts are alive. The poem she started that morning may return to her now, fully formed. Or another, completely new, may whisper itself into her ear. But she does not write just yet. She lets it steep. These are the hours when memory curls close. She thinks of her brother Austin, who lives next door with Susan. Their closeness once electric, now strained by time, silence, and the ordinary wear of life. She thinks of Susan, always, the weight of that love, the distance of it, the way it still hums beneath every poem. She does not speak these thoughts. She never does. But they flicker in her expression, and the way her fingers curl, and the way her eyes follow the shadows on the wall. The fire burns low. Emily may rise soon, with a small nod to Lavinia, and climb the stairs back to her room. There is no ceremony. Just the familiar sound of footfall on old wood. The sound of returning. And yet, even in this stillness, or especially in it, something eternal is felt. The house, the fire, the family, all held in delicate balance, like lines of a poem that never needed to rhyme, only to rest beside one another. And so, as the evening deepens and the hearth grows dim, another chapter of her invisible life closes like a book read only by candlelight. Her room is not grand. It is not adorned with lavish tapestries or expensive furnishings. No velvet drapes, no ornate mirrors, no gilded frames. Just pale walls, a modest writing desk, a narrow bed, and a window that knows her gaze as intimately as her own reflection. And yet, it is a universe. To Emily Dickinson, this room is more than shelter. It is her canvas, her laboratory, her sanctuary. It is the single space where she can fully be. She lights her lamp. Not a gaslight, not a chandelier, just a simple flame, flickering within glass. It casts long, slow shadows on the wall, making the corners of the room seem deeper than they are. The light does not conquer the darkness here. It dances with it. On her desk, a small stack of folded papers waits. The day's lines, fragments from yesterday, letters begun but never sent. There may be a flower pressed between pages, or a bit of ribbon saved from some half-forgotten gift. Nothing is without meaning. Nothing is truly random. She sits, and begins once more to read what she has written, softly, silently, with the kind of focus usually reserved for prayer. Sometimes she shakes her head gently, not in disappointment, but in wonder, as if surprised that such a line had passed through her hand. Sometimes she smiles, a faint wry smile, the kind one makes when overhearing a good secret. And sometimes she weeps, not loudly, not always visibly, but inwardly deeply, because the words do not just express, they reveal. They hold mirrors to things she has not dared to name aloud. And in the act of reading them, she sees herself more clearly than anyone else ever could. There are letters to answer too, friends from afar, editors who do not understand her punctuation, cousins who ask kindly about her health. And then there is Susan, always Susan, the recipient of so many folded poems and coded phrases. To her, Emily writes with a voice more bare than to anyone else. Tonight, perhaps, she writes, I am out with lanterns looking for myself. Or, you are the only person with whom I can sit in the dark and feel light. She does not always send these letters. Some she hides. Some she rewrites into poems. Others she folds into drawers, where they will sleep until someone, years later, finds them and wonders. This is not loneliness, dear dreamer. This is devotion. To language, to truth, to the invisible threads that tie us to those we love, even when we cannot say so aloud. And as the hour grows late, and the lamp flickers lower, Emily leans back in her chair and looks once more out the window. The stars blink slowly. The town sleeps. The world, for a moment, feels suspended in breath. And in her room, still and silent, the poet prepares to listen once more, to the voice within, and the darkness beyond. Midnight. That peculiar hour when time feels unfastened. The world is neither asleep nor fully awake. It lingers in a limbo, like a breath drawn and never released. In Emily's room, the lamp still burns. Its flame is low now, but steady, casting amber light upon her pale desk and the shadows that lean in to listen. The window is black glass, offering no reflection, only the night's quiet stare. There are no bells ringing, no carriages on the road, no footsteps in the hallway. She is alone. Entirely. And yet, not lonely. These are the hours she loves most. Not because they are peaceful, but because they are open. The rest of the world, with its expectations and interruptions, has gone quiet. And now, her mind can move without resistance. Her pencil is in hand. Not hurried, not pressed, but lifted like a wand. Her hand moves slowly, deliberately, across the page. Each stroke is a thought made visible, each line a glimpse into the shadows of her inner world. Sometimes she writes about death, not morbidly, not fearfully, but curiously, intimately, as if death were not an end, but a door slightly ajar. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. She imagines death as a gentleman caller, polite, patient, a carriage driver, arriving when she is not yet dressed, ready to take her for a ride through memory, eternity, and stillness. Other nights she writes about the soul, its hidden corners, its inexplicable longings, its refusal to be measured. She questions whether it survives the body, whether it is tethered to love, whether it too feels loneliness. She once asked, "The soul should always stand ajar, that if the heaven inquire, he will not be obliged to wait, or shy of troubling her." This is not doctrine. This is not sermon. This is Emily's own gospel, handwritten in pencil, under the lamplight. She pauses now. Her hand rests. The room does not move. Even the candle seems to have stilled its flicker, as if watching her. She looks toward the door, which is closed, always closed. Behind it, the house sleeps. Her sister dreams. The cat curls in the hallway. But Emily, here, remains in vigil, not for anything specific, but for everything. She is waiting not for sleep, but for understanding. And as the night stretches on, long and quiet and unbroken, she allows herself to feel everything at once. The ache of yearning, the shimmer of inspiration, the sting of remembering, and the awe of existing at all. She does not need answers. She only needs to ask. And so, as the clock ticks softly toward morning, and the ink dries on another nearly silent revelation, another piece of her soul has found its shape. There is an hour just before sunrise that belongs to no one, a ghostly, breathless stretch of time when the stars are still visible, but the sky has begun to pale. It is not yet morning, but no longer night. A space between heartbeats, between dreams. This, dear dreamer, is where we find Emily now. She has not yet gone to sleep. Or perhaps she has only drifted, lightly, briefly, like a bird resting on a branch before flight. Her body is still seated, gently slouched in the chair by the window, her head resting against her hand, her eyes half closed. The candle has burned down low, its flame trembling as if uncertain whether to continue. And outside, the world is suspended in silver. The trees, silhouetted against a bruising sky, stand quietly as if listening. The rooftops of Amherst shimmer faintly with dew. A single bird may test its voice, just one clear note, offered into the hush like a question. Emily watches. She is not tired. She is not restless. She is simply aware. This is the hour when her thoughts feel most tender, no longer sharp with the alertness of night, not yet dulled by the routines of day. She reflects not on events, but on essences. She thinks of time, how it folds and doubles back. She thinks of immortality, not as a destination, but as a question that lingers. She thinks of love, how it changes, how it refuses to leave. She once wrote, "Morning is the place for dew. Corn is made at noon. After dinner light, for flowers. Dukes, for setting sun." She understood the day not by the clock, but by the light. And now, in this blue-gray hush, she exists in her favorite kind of time, unmeasured, unnamed, unclaimed. She may return to her bed soon. Just for an hour. A little sleep before the house wakes. Or she may remain here, watching the light slowly rise like a curtain over her familiar world. And in this moment, fragile, liminal, divine, she is as she always is, unseen, undisturbed, and quietly eternal. No letters arrive at this hour. No knock at the door. No birds scatter the garden yet. It is the hour for reflection, for stillness, for the rarest kind of presence, the kind that asks nothing, that simply is. She may hum a little now, a soft sound, tuneless, perhaps not even conscious, just breath given shape. Her eyes close fully, her hand rests in her lap. And so the new day finds her not with ceremony, but with grace. And as the sun finally breaks the edge of the earth and spells gold onto the roof of her quiet home, Emily Dickinson is still, breathing, dreaming, becoming. And thus, dear dreamer, another circle completes itself. The sun has now entered the room, not as a blaze, not as a command, but as a quiet guest, spilling gold along the floorboards, kissing the corners of the windowsill, warming the very air she breathes. And Emily opens her eyes. She has not slept long. Perhaps an hour, perhaps not at all. But rest for her is not always measured in hours. Sometimes a moment of stillness is enough. She rises slowly. Her white dress, folded neatly at the foot of the bed, is slipped on with the same care one might give to wrapping a fragile gift. It is not a statement, not a performance. It is habit, a ritual so deeply woven into her identity that to wear any other color would feel like speaking someone else's language. White, the color of clouds, of silence, of possibility. Downstairs, the house stirs. Lavinia moves to her own gentle rituals. The kettle is already on. The clink of cups against saucers echoes faintly, like memory remembering itself. Emily does not rush to join. Instead, she walks to her window, her bare feet silent against the floor. She stands there, not to observe, but to receive. The garden, still dewy and dreaming, unfolds beneath her. The trees stretch in morning stillness. The air smells faintly of pine, and something sweet, perhaps lilac, or the lingering ghost of yesterday's sun. There is peace in repetition. This quiet hour of dressing, watching, writing, brewing tea, is not boring to her. It is sacred. It is her architecture, her liturgy. The outside world may crave novelty, new fashions, new opinions, new neighbors. But Emily finds her vastest joys in sameness, in knowing that the light will return to her writing desk at exactly the same angle, that the robin will return to the garden hedge, that the letters she left unanswered will still be waiting, patiently. She once wrote, "To live is so startling it leaves little time for anything else." And so she lives, fully, inside these hours that others might overlook. She writes a single line on the page. Perhaps something about morning, or silence, or the dust that dances in sunbeams when no one is watching. She may press a flower today, or reread an old poem and change a single word. She may sit with Lavinia over breakfast and say little. She may not speak at all. But her presence, attentive, deliberate, is an entire world unfolding. No two mornings are ever truly the same. And yet, in their soft rhythm, she finds the echo of eternity. And so, as the teacup warms her hands and the light slides slowly across her desk, Emily Dickinson begins again, not where she left off, but where the day has found her. By mid-morning, the house is fully awake, but still cloaked in quiet. Sunlight now filters cleanly through the glass, casting its golden net across the writing table, where Emily sits surrounded by a quiet storm of paper. Sheets folded, scraps torn from letters, envelopes turned inside out. Her tools are humble, and yet what they hold is immeasurable. This, dear dreamer, is the hour of fascicles. She has written hundreds of poems, more than anyone knows. But they do not sit neatly in bound volumes or tidy drawers. They live in these hand-sewn booklets, her fascicles, small collections of folded paper stitched together with thread, each one a private volume, a sacred diary. Today, she returns to them. She opens one slowly, carefully, as if greeting an old friend. Inside, pages of slanted handwriting, dashes scattered like falling stars, capital letters blooming mid-thought. There is no order except the one she feels. No logic but rhythm, no structure but intuition. She does not seek perfection. She seeks truth, in its briefest, purest form. A line may appear simple. Hope is the thing with feathers. But beneath it, an ocean, a hymn, a trembling recognition of how fragile and stubborn the human soul can be. She rereads her own work not to admire it, but to understand it. Often, she doesn't recall when she wrote a certain verse, only that it arrived. As if it were not hers at all, but dictated by something vast and unseen. She rearranges a few pages, replaces a word. She pins a new poem to the edge of a fascicle already full. No title, no date, only breath. There is no one else in the room. No applause, no eyes to witness. And yet this quiet act, this stitching of words into folded pages, is one of the most radical acts of authorship ever performed in silence. Outside, Amherst goes about its business. Mail is delivered. Bread is baked. Children play on the green. No one knows what is happening in this upstairs room. How a woman, nearly invisible to her world, is preserving the marrow of her mind in homemade books. She is not hiding. She is preparing. She does not know, of course, that decades from now, these fragile fascicles will be found, puzzled over, published, adored. That her name, once a whisper, will become an echo across centuries. She does not need to know. What matters is the act, the making, the care, the whisper that says, "This mattered if only to me." And so, dear dreamer, as another poem is tucked safely into its folded nest and another morning slips, unnoticed, into noon, Emily Dickinson continues to create a world no one sees, and yet one that will outlast us all. It is early afternoon in Amherst. The sun is high, but soft. Not oppressive, just present. The shadows are shorter now, and the heat of the day begins to hum quietly beneath the floorboards. The garden glows. The walls, warmed by sunlight, hold the quiet like an old violin holds sound long after the last note. In the upper room of the Dickinson house, Emily is not writing, not reading, not moving. She is simply being. And in that being, there is a kind of music. Not music as we know it. No piano key struck, no melody sung, but the music of attention, of silence, of the slow orchestration of thought and breath and space. She sits by the open window. Her hands are folded in her lap, her face turned toward the garden. The honeysuckle leans into the frame, its scent carried in on the breeze. Somewhere, a bee labors over a petal. A bird lands, then takes off again, the motion barely registering except in her eyes. To an outsider, it might appear as though she is doing nothing. But inside her, a symphony stirs. This is the hour where solitude becomes its own kind of song, not lonely, but sacred. She does not need the world to come to her. She does not need to go to the world. She is enough. She once wrote, "On nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too?" A playful line, yes, but also a quiet defiance. An understanding that to be unseen is not to be erased, it is to be free. She has learned the music of her own mind, its shifts and swells, its silences and surprises. She follows and not with discipline, but with devotion, letting thoughts rise and fall like waves against the inside of her ribs. This hour is not for creating, not for baking or writing or editing or answering. It is for listening to herself, to what she has not yet said, to what she may never say. She may close her eyes now, just for a while, not to sleep, but to see more clearly. The mind, when untethered, begins to show us things we've forgotten how to notice. A memory of a glove dropped in snow, a phrase overheard years ago, the shape of Susan's smile in springtime. She does not chase these images. She lets them come. They arrive like guests at a quiet gathering, each one bringing something small and holy. Outside, the world continues. Carriages pass, birds argue in the hedges, the mail is sorted. But inside, Emily floats in the still, golden air of her thoughts. And so, as the day bends toward late afternoon, and the garden begins to shift its tone once more, another silent composition has been written, entirely in the language of presence. By late afternoon, the sunlight no longer pours. It stretches, softer now, reaching long fingers across the room, casting everything in that particular light Emily knew so well, the light that asks questions but offers no answers. She once wrote, "There's a certain slant of light, winter afternoons, that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. And while it is not winter today, that weight, that gentle, aching pressure, is here. This is the hour when memory visits, not dramatically, not with tears or sighs, just gently, as a feeling, as the way the air changes when someone you love has just stepped into a room you cannot see. Emily feels it now. Perhaps she remembers her friend Benjamin Newton, the law clerk who gave her books, who saw the poet in the quiet girl before anyone else. He died young and quietly, as people did in those days, but not before planting a seed that would never stop blooming inside her. Or perhaps today she is thinking of her nephew Gib, Susan and Austin's bright, tender-hearted boy, who died at 8 years old. His absence became a shadow across the Dickinson family, one that never quite receded. Emily felt that shadow deeply. She knew, as few others did, how to write of death without fear. How to hold it, not like a monster, but like a mirror. She wrote of it often, with a calmness that unnerved editors, with a clarity that outlived them all. Death, to Emily, was not a door slammed shut. It was a space, quiet, cool, inevitable, where the soul paused to breathe. She might write about it now, or she might not. She might simply sit at her desk and let the ache move through her like smoke. She was not one to name her grief aloud, but you could hear it in her poems, in the way she described the silence after a storm, in the way a bird could uncertain hop down a path, unaware that it, too, was part of the divine. This late afternoon melancholy, this beautiful, aching shadow, was not something she sought to avoid. She welcomed it, not as sorrow, but as presence. Proof that she had loved. Proof that she remembered. And so she sits now, the pen in her hand but unmoving, the paper before her blank, not from lack of words, but because sometimes silence says more. Outside, the wind rustles the garden. A petal falls from a flower whose name she knows. The room grows cooler. The light deepens. And Emily, in her stillness, becomes part of the poem she does not write. And so, as the last of the afternoon slips behind the trees, and the world grows quiet in preparation for evening's return, another shadow joins her, soft and familiar. Dusk does not fall in the Dickinson house, it settles, like lace being drawn over a table, or a hand brushing across the surface of a closed book. The sun has lowered itself gently behind the trees, and the room begins to change. The colors soften. White becomes ivory, gold becomes grey, and shadows bloom in corners like old secrets come home to rest. Emily notices it all. She has always been faithful to the changes of light. To her, it is not just time passing, it is the soul of the day revealing its final shape. She watches the ceiling grow dimmer, the window pale with reflection. She moves slowly now, not from fatigue, but from reverence. The hour before lamplight is a kind of ceremony. She rises from her desk, folds the paper, whether written upon or not, places her pencil beside it, straightens the edge of a book. These small gestures are not about tidiness, they are rituals, markings of transition. The day is ending, the night begins. Perhaps she changes her dress now. Always white, always simple, but one for daytime, another for evening. Linen worn soft at the sleeves, the collar mended more than once by Lavinia's hand. The act of dressing, of choosing white over and over, is not eccentricity. It is vow. It is Emily's devotion to clarity, to interior space, to becoming as blank and receptive as the paper she writes upon. White, for her, is not absence. It is possibility. Downstairs, Lavinia may be lighting the first lamp, the match striking like a whisper against stone. The smell of it, sulfur, warmth, dust, drifts upward, through the stairwell, past old portraits, past the hollow ticking of the hall clock. Emily hears it. She does not rush to follow. She lets the evening arrive on its own. In the mirror, if she chooses to look, she does not see what others might see. A pale woman with strange habits, a face untouched by fashion. She sees the witness of the day, the vessel of its mystery, the poet unperformed. She may speak softly now, to herself, or to the air. A line she's testing, a phrase she's kept all day, or perhaps only a breath, shaped like a word that never needs to be spoken. She may not write it down. Not yet. Some thoughts must steep, like tea, like twilight. And so, she remains in this fading light, between lamplight and darkness, between breath and silence, the truest space she knows. As dusk folds itself into the arms of evening, and the world below prepares for supper, prayer, and sleep, Emily Dickinson prepares for something else entirely. The great, invisible cathedral of thought that only opens its doors once night has fully fallen. The lamp has been lit. Its light is small, but sure. A single flame behind glass, flickering ever so slightly in the still air, casting halos upon her pages, shadows upon her walls. In this house, at this hour, it is the most faithful of companions. Emily sits once more at her desk. The rest of Amherst, and perhaps the world, prepares for sleep. Windows are shuttered, candles blown out. The roads fall silent. But in this one room, light continues. Not bright, not boastful, but steady. Like her. This is her hour. Not for the outside world. Not even for correspondence or the editing of verses. This hour is for inwardness. For the deep well of self that she draws from without fear. She writes now not from observation, but from instinct. The lines that come in this hour are often the most elusive. They arrive like dreams, half-formed, stitched together by feeling more than form. She does not resist their strangeness. She welcomes it. Tonight, perhaps, she writes, the brain is wider than the sky. And pauses. Not for clarification, but to let the truth of it settle. Her mind, dear dreamer, is a cathedral with no walls. A room within a room. It stretches past the roofline of her house, past the hills of Amherst, past the very sky she writes about. It is here, at night, that it blooms most fully. She does not need much. Just paper, pencil, the hush, the feeling. A cat may brush against her leg. A breeze might ripple the curtain. Lavinia's footsteps echo distantly down the hall. All of it is part of the ritual. She writes quickly, as if chasing something, a thought that moves just ahead of her, daring her to follow. Then pauses. Folds the page. Starts again. Some of these poems will live in her drawers forever. Others will be tucked into letters. Some will never be read by another living soul. It does not matter. She does not write to be heard. She writes to listen. To what? To whom? To herself. To God. To the wind in the garden. To the silence that surrounds everything. She once wrote, I dwell in possibility, a fairer house than prose. And here, in this quiet lamplit hour, that dwelling is real. Built not of brick, but of imagination. Not of doors, but of windows. Wide open. Always. She leans back now, gazes at the ceiling. The light glows against her pale cheek. Her expression unreadable, as if she is somewhere else entirely, and yet nowhere more present. And so, as the hour grows deeper and the lamp holds its final vigil, another verse is born into the quiet, unseen, unspoken, eternal. The lamp burns low. Its flame, steady yet subdued, casts lone, sighing shadows across the room, and the walls seem to lean inward, listening. But beyond the glow, beyond the reach of candlelight, another kind of light begins to bloom, cold, clear, and ancient. Emily rises from her desk and moves to the window. The pane is cold to her touch. The world outside is still, not merely quiet, but sacred. The kind of stillness that suggests something greater is just behind the veil. Above the garden, above the sleeping rooftops of Amherst, the stars have returned. To most, they are distant, decorative. Pinpricks of wonder scattered across the black velvet of night. But to Emily, oh, to Emily, they are not just stars. They are poems she cannot yet read. Letters she cannot yet open. Answers to questions she hasn't dared to ask. She gazes at them, long and without fear. Her poetry has always reached for the infinite, even when it seemed small, even when it was about bees and blossoms and clover. There was always, beneath it all, that quiet hunger for eternity. Forever is composed of nows, she once wrote. And here, at the window, she embodies that very truth. She does not imagine heaven as a place far away, paved with gold and song. She imagines it as a slant of light, a pause in the breath, a petal falling at the exact moment it should. Her religion is not built on sermons, but on stars, on silence, on awe. Faith, for Emily, is not certainty. It is attention. It is the willingness to stand at the window each night and believe that the cold, brilliant lights above are speaking, even if they use a language no one else remembers. Tonight, she does not write. She does not speak. She simply watches. A meteor might pass. A bird might cry out once in its sleep. A breeze might shiver through the vines clinging to the porch. These are her scriptures. And the window? It is both barrier and invitation, the very frame through which the infinite makes itself known to the finite. She places her poem flat against the pane, as if reaching for the dark. Not to change it, not to escape it, but to feel it. To know that even in solitude, even in silence, even in the smallest room of the quietest house, the stars still shine. And so, dear dreamer, as the night deepens and the stars hold their ancient watch, Emily Dickinson, the woman who did not leave her home, looks out into a sky more vast than empire, and finds, within herself, a universe just as wide. The stars hold steady above Amherst, and the lamplight flickers low, weary but loyal. Inside her room, the walls have grown darker, deeper, more forgiving. The edges of objects blur. The sharpness of thought begins to yield to something softer. Emily closes the notebook. Her fingers linger on its cover, not possessive, not reluctant, simply reverent. As if closing it is not an end, but a whisper to the night, "You may speak now." She stands for a moment at the edge of the room. The flame in the lamp trembles, then dies with a sigh, not dramatic, not sudden. Just a slow folding of light into shadow. The kind of ending that feels like a promise. And now, the room is quiet. Not just silent, quiet. The kind of quiet where nothing is missing. The kind of quiet where the soul begins to hear itself. She moves to the bed, her steps soft as memory. The quilt is folded back, the pillow cool. She slips beneath the covers as if entering a secret. A retreat. A small, holy place where the day's thoughts can rest. Emily never feared sleep. She approached it like a philosopher, a mystic, a quiet guest of the unknown. To her, it was not escape. It was inquiry. A dark hallway that might lead to anything, to revelation, to memory, to God. She once asked, "Does not eternity appear too short a time to live?" And in sleep, she tasted something of that eternity. Not because it was long, but because it was boundaryless. Tonight, as her body yields to rest, her mind does not entirely still. It softens. It begins to float. Images rise and fall like lanterns in water. A white dress on a laundry line, the sound of Susan laughing just beyond the hedge, the feel of ink smudging beneath her hand. Not dreams exactly. Not visions. Just fragments, untethered, gentle. She does not resist them. Emily knew how to let go without losing herself. Knew how to wander within the confines of her room and still find the edges of the universe. She knew that sleep is not the opposite of waking, it is its echo. The house is sleeping now. Even Lavinia's movements, once delicate, are still. The hearth downstairs is dark. The garden rests beneath its blanket of dew. And above it all, the stars continue their ancient silence, watching through her window like old friends. The poet sleeps. And though no one sees her, not tonight, not tomorrow, the world is better for her dreaming. And so, dear dreamer, as her breath deepens and her body curls into the soft, endless dark, we, too, are invited to rest. For what is rest, if not the space we make for beauty to return? Emily sleeps. Her room, wrapped in darkness, is now more idea than place. The outlines of furniture, the pale quilt, the curve of her arm beneath it, all fade gently into shadow. There is no movement now, save for the rise and fall of breath, slow and steady, like the tide whispering along the edge of a forgotten shore. But the mind does not sleep. Not entirely. For Emily, dreams are not indulgence. They are inquiry. They are the mind unbending its collar, removing its gloves, slipping barefoot into mystery. And tonight, in that space beyond the conscious, her thoughts take on new form. A staircase appears, familiar, but leading upward into mist. A meadow unfolds beneath a violet sky, strewn with letters not yet written. She sees a single bee hover above a bloom, and then dissolve into a line of verse. She hears her own voice, distant, reciting a poem she hasn't yet composed, a voice both hers and not hers, like a song remembered from childhood. This is not the world of waking, and yet it is no less real. In her dream, perhaps she walks through her garden, but the flowers are made of paper. The trees recite scripture in a language only she understands. Susan waits by the gate, holding a ribbon, saying nothing. And Emily smiles. This realm, suspended between the veil of sleep and wakefulness, is where her truest self often dwells, unobserved, unburdened, unafraid. Here, no one knocks at the door. No editor edits her punctuation. No expectation presses upon her small frame. She is simply a soul, wandering. Even asleep, she is composing. Not always with language, sometimes with color, sometimes with silence. A single line might rise up out of the dream like a lily from water. She will not remember it precisely, but in the morning, she will reach for it, not with her hands, but with her breath. And perhaps by noon, it will become something written. Or perhaps it will vanish, and still leave something behind. She once wrote, "A word is dead. When it is said, some say, I say it just, begins to live." That day, and in this deep hour of sleep, new words are beginning to live, unborn, unspoken, but waiting. Outside, the world remains still. A breeze brushes gently through the trees. An owl calls once, low and distant. The stars, eternal, remain unmoved, but somehow more tender now. Inside, the poet dreams. And as she does, something ancient and beautiful stirs within the dark. A language older than language, humming softly beneath the folds of time. And so, dear dreamer, as we linger at the edge of her dreaming mind, let us rest here with her, wordless, weightless, and whole. There is a moment, fragile and almost holy, when sleep loosens its grasp, but the body has not yet stirred. A breath caught between worlds. A heartbeat echoed in two realms at once. This, dear dreamer, is where Emily now lies. Her room is still cloaked in shadow, but the sky beyond the window has begun to shift, just barely. The black of night has softened into indigo. The stars are fading, their voices quieter, as if they've said what they came to say. Inside, the silence deepens, not emptiness, but fullness. Emily's breath is even. Her hands, folded beneath the quilt, twitch once, not with effort, but with the mind's first quiet attempt to return. She is not yet awake, but the world is waiting. This is the hour when the first poems of the day arrive, not written, not even spoken, but felt. As if the air itself is heavy with words. As if the dawn is pressing a kiss to her forehead, whispering, "Remember me." She once wrote, "We dream, it is good we are dreaming. It would hurt us, were we awake." And perhaps that is what this hour protects, the dreamer from the ache of returning, too quickly, to the weight of being. In this near-waking state, her thoughts begin to stir. Not with logic or intention, but with image. A garden, dew-covered eternal. A face, beloved, but turned away. A sentence, unfinished, echoing in her chest. She does not rush toward them. She lets them hover. As one might let a bird settle gently on the sill, uninvited, but welcome. The room begins to return, the feel of the sheet, the faint creak of the wooden frame, the scent of old paper and cold air. But still, she lingers. Emily has never hurried. Not through life. Not through waking. This hour, so easily lost to busyness, is for her the most alive. It is the mind's first light, softer than sunlight, older than memory. Perhaps today she will remember something the dream left behind, a word, a rhythm, a question. Perhaps she will not. But still, she will carry it. Into the morning, into the kitchen, into her paper, her bread, her silence. Outside, the trees begin to move. Just a little. A bird tests its wings on a nearby branch. The sky turns the color of pearl. And within this upstairs room, Emily's eyes begin to flutter, not quite open, but no longer closed. And so, as the world exhales and the light begins again to press against the glass, the poet prepares, once more, to rise. The sky has turned pale. That first, almost colorless light, not quite blue, not quite gold, has begun to seep across the horizon, brushing the edges of rooftops, kissing the spines of books in the Dickinson library, and filtering, ever so delicately, into the upstairs room where Emily lies. her eyes open. Not all at once, not in the abrupt fashion of those roused by duty or alarm. She opens them slowly, like a page being turned. Her gaze is soft, unfocused, seeing not yet the room, but the memory of what the room once held. She does not sit up immediately. She lies there, letting the morning arrive, letting her thoughts unspool, like ribbon dropped from a drawer. They do not rush. They know they will be heard. She blinks once, twice. The ceiling greets her, familiar and unchanging. There's a cobweb in the corner she's noticed before, left untouched. Not out of neglect, but out of kindness. The spider, like her, is weaving in silence, creating something unseen. She shifts beneath the quilt. The movement is small, but deliberate, of returning to the body, to the frame that holds all this thought. Her hair spells loose over the pillow. Her hand curls softly near her chest. And then, when the time feels right, she sits. The floor is cool under her feet. The room's still dim, but the light is coming. She knows its rhythm, knows that in moments, it will touch the corner of her desk first, then slide up the wall like a slow, golden tide. She wraps herself in her robe, white, like the dress she will wear later. She moves to the window. The glass is cool. The garden below, hushed. There is a mist that clings to the hedges, a veil that makes the world seem half-formed. Birds begin to speak, tentative, like students unsure of the lesson. Emily watches. This act, this watching, is not idle. It is the core of her practice. It is how she enters the day. Not by command, but by consent. Not with plans, but with openness. She once wrote, "I'll tell you how the sun rose, a ribbon at a time. And this morning, the sun is rising just so, slowly, respectfully, a ribbon unspooled across a sky just beginning to believe in its own brightness." She stands there still until the light touches her hand. Then she turns, not dramatically, not ceremoniously, and begins her morning with the same sacredness she gave her sleep. Today, there may be letters, or a line waiting to be captured, or simply the sound of her sister's footsteps on the stairs. Whatever the day brings, she will meet it, not with armor, but with attention. And so, dear dreamer, as the house begins to stir and the new light lays itself gently across her desk, Emily Dickinson returns once more, silently, to the life she's chosen and the pages yet to be written. The house is waking. Lavinia's footsteps pad lightly down the hallway, familiar and soft. A door opens, the floorboard near the stair creaks just as it always does, and the day begins in its quiet choreography. Nothing announced. Everything felt. Downstairs, the kitchen breathes warmth. The stove has been lit. The scent of kindling and ash blends with the earliest notes of cinnamon, flour, and warmth. There is no rush, only rhythm. A slow, practiced unfolding. Emily enters softly. She is not always present at breakfast. Sometimes a note is left in her place, a line of verse, a tender refusal. But today she comes. Her white dress rustles slightly, her sleeves pushed back. Her hands, pale and small, know their work. She begins to bake. Not with flourish, not as distraction, but as practice, like writing, like watching the sky. Her hands move through flour with reverence, not performance. The mixing bowl is a kind of sanctuary. The wooden spoon, a pen of another kind. She does not speak much while she works, but her mind is rarely silent. As she kneads the dough, she is also turning phrases. As she shakes the loaf, she is shaping ideas. Her inner and outer lives move together, not separate, but seamless. This is a domestic hour, and yet entirely divine. Sometimes Lavinia joins her. The sisters speak in a shorthand of movement, and glances. One knows when to pass the towel. The other knows when to pour the milk. There are no instructions spoken aloud. Only the understanding that comes from years of shared silence. The bread rises in the warm air. Time slows. While it bakes, Emily may retreat to the hallway table, where the morning's letters have arrived. The postman leaves them quietly. He knows better than to knock. Some are from old friends. Some from editors. Some from distant cousins writing in looped ink across heavy paper. She reads them with care. Even the most mundane note is a window. A line might strike her, a phrase turn inside her. Sometimes, a single word is enough to start a poem. She does not respond immediately. Her replies are never hurried. They arrive like rain, sometimes unexpected, sometimes late, always deep. Once the bread is done, the room is filled with warmth, not just heat, but a kind of presence. The smell of it, the way it rests on the cooling rack, is poetry in its own right. She may cut a slice, offer one to Lavinia, or leave the loaf whole, as if untouched bread were a symbol, a quiet altar to the art of daily life. In this hour, nothing is grand, but everything matters. And so, dear dreamer, as the morning moves gently toward noon, and the bread cools beside a folded letter and a half-written verse, Emily Dickinson inhabits her world completely, with hands dusted in flour and thoughts dusted in starlight. It is now midday in Amherst. The town is awake, but not loud. Its rhythm is that of a place used to patience, horses clopping along the dirt roads, shop bells ringing faintly, children laughing in gardens. All of it distant, as though taking care not to disturb the quietest house on Main Street. Inside the Dickinson home, stillness prevails. Emily is upstairs again. The noon light, clean and white, pours into her room, laying itself across her desk and the edge of her bed like a slow tide. It does not demand attention. It simply is, like her. This is the hour she most often returns to her pages. Not with the fever of inspiration, but with the calm hand of someone tending a beloved garden. She reads, rewrites, pauses. She revisits lines she scribbled days before, turning them in her mind like stones in a river, searching for smoothness. One line might stay with her for an hour. Another might slip from her pencil in a moment, perfect and whole, as though it had always existed, waiting to be found. I felt a funeral in my brain. She may murmur today, remembering a dream or a heaviness she cannot quite name. Her poetry does not come from drama. It comes from the smallest internal earthquakes, a shift in the air, a change in tone, a fleeting ache. She once wrote, "A thought went up my mind today that I have had before, but did not finish some way back. I could not fix the year." And so, she tries again. She is not chasing fame. She does not seek publication. Though editors exist, and sometimes, nervously, she sends her verses to them, she writes for the page itself. For the act. For the mystery. Her door remains closed. Not locked, just gently shut, a boundary not of separation, but of intention. Lavinia knows not to interrupt. Even the cat, it seems, treads lightly in this hour. There is no lunch bell, no visitors. Only the sound of paper sliding across wood. The occasional creak of her chair. The wind brushing against the pane. Outside, the world turns. Inside, she notices it. Sometimes, she moves to the window. She does not seek a view. She seeks proximity to the trees, the sky, the changing light. These things are her companions, her collaborators. There are no wasted hours in this room. Even the moments of staring, unmoving, into the middle distance are part of the work. For it is not always the writing that matters, it is the readiness to receive. And so, as the light begins to shift once again, and her pencil rests gently on the page. Emily Dickinson sits within her own soft orbit. Solitary, yes, but never alone. The sun, now past its peak, leans gently westward. It filters through the high branches outside the Dickinson house, and spills into Emily's upstairs room in long, golden slats. This is the light she loves most, not the promise of morning, nor the certainty of noon, but the reflection of all that has passed. The afternoon, like a faded photograph, holds its breath. Emily rises from her desk. She has written, revised, read. She has watched the garden in the wind and her own thoughts blooming and curling like ivy on an old wall. And now, she drifts. Not aimlessly, not listlessly, but with that peculiar grace she always carried, the grace of someone completely present to the invisible. She moves through the upstairs hallway. Her hand brushes lightly along the wooden railing, her footsteps soft against the rug. She may pause outside the room that was once her mother's, or at the window that faces the Dickinson barn, watching dust rise as a servant carries and feed. She is not seeking anyone, but she is noticing everything. Sometimes she descends the back stairs to the kitchen, not for food, but to fill her senses. The cool stone floor beneath her feet, the way sunlight lays itself across the pantry door, a faint trace of lavender soap on the sink. These things, mundane to most, are charged with poetry for her. A plate drying on a rack, a teacup left slightly ajar, the worn edge of a tablecloth. All of it speaks. She once wrote, "Nature is what we see. The hill, the afternoon, squirrel, eclipse, the bumblebee. Nay, nature is heaven. And in this hour, dear dreamer, she lives in that heaven. Not a place of harps and hymns, but of quiet corners and filtered light. A sanctuary made of shadows and soft footfalls. She may sit now, just for a moment, at the piano. Her fingers, rarely bold, may find a single note. 2. A slow, uncertain chord. She does not play often, and never for anyone else. But sometimes, the sound helps her think, helps her feel. It lingers in the air like breath. She does not speak. There is no one here to impress, no performance to prepare. She has long since abandoned society's stage. And yet, in her solitude, she is most herself. White dress, bare feet, a loose strand of hair curling at her temple. She moves like memory, unhurried, undeniable. And so, as the clock ticks softly in the background and the day leans into its gentlest hour, Emily Dickinson, the woman who never truly left home, finds within her walls a world no map could hold. The sun has dipped now, its light no longer bright, but honeyed, thick and warm and slow. In the parlor below, a single lamp glows faintly, casting its golden net over the furniture, the lace curtains, the well-thumbed books stacked carefully on a side table. Emily descends the stairs. She does so without sound. Her white dress catches the low light like silk, and her feet, bare or slippered, leave no echo. The house, always quiet, seems to exhale as she enters the room. Lavinia is already there. She is seated in a high-backed chair, a book open in her lap, her expression thoughtful. The two sisters exchange no greeting. They do not need to. Their bond is old, solid, and comfortably unspoken. They are not a pair of dramatic sisters. There are no quarrels here, no theatrical sighs. Their intimacy is built of shared glances, long silences, small kindnesses, the teacup left on the edge of a tray, the shawl draped quietly over a chair, the willingness to sit beside each other and not fill the space with words. Emily settles into her own chair, a smaller one, near the window. She folds her hands, watches the light dim. The room is not grand, but it is full of time. Time, caught in the polish of the wooden floor, in the crackling of the fire when lit, in the faint scent of dried lavender tucked behind the mantel. Time, held in the walls by the quiet repetition of days like this one. Sometimes they speak, a few lines of verse Emily found amusing, or a passing thought about a neighbor's odd behavior. Lavinia might read a letter aloud, or describe something she saw in town. But often, they just sit. And sitting to them is not idle. It is reverence. The presence of another, someone who understands your silence, is a kind of grace. One that many live their whole lives without. Tonight, Emily may share a line she thought of earlier. Or she may not. She may simply enjoy the sound of the lamp's flame flickering, the feel of the worn fabric beneath her hand, the quiet press of her sister's nearness. In this moment, the house feels like its truest self, not a dwelling, but a shell. A sacred shape that holds the soft heartbeat of two women who chose a life apart, and yet entirely full. Outside, the sky darkens. Inside, the light holds, just a little longer. And so, dear dreamer, as the fire sleeps in its hearth and the pages of the day begin to close, Emily and Lavinia dwell in the holiness of routine. A room, a lamp, a silence that says you are understood. The evening has exhaled. The lamp burns low. Its circle of light has shrunk, warm and flickering, casting gentle gold on the pages of the open book on Lavinia's lap, the white folds of Emily's dress, the brass trim of the hearth. Outside, the wind stirs only faintly, a soft rustling, like someone turning in bed. It is time to rise. Emily does so without effort. Her limbs move not with fatigue, but with familiarity. Each motion, each habit, is well-worn, a liturgy shaped by repetition and grace. She bids her sister good night not with words, but with a small touch on the shoulder, a glance that lingers. Lavinia nods. She understands. Upstairs, the room is waiting. The bed turned down, the window closed, the candle lit. A flickering flame in a sea of shadow, not to light the way, but to keep the dark from forgetting her. Emily stands for a moment in the doorway. The room is as she left it, spare, soft, hers. The desk holds her papers, undisturbed. The pillow is plump just so. The book she did not finish lies open on the bedpost, as if still listening. She moves slowly now. Not from age or weariness, but from reverence. The act of undressing, of laying aside the white dress, is not a performance. It is a return. She folds the fabric carefully, places it in its usual drawer, and slips into her nightgown, pale, simple, long. It brushes her ankles like a sigh. She approaches the candle. Its flame wavers in her breath, almost uncertain. She watches it, not as a tool, but as a symbol. A light held in the palm of darkness. A whisper against the void. She does not blow it out yet. Instead, she sits once more, just briefly, at the edge of her bed. There is no journal, no final note. Only her hands folded loosely in her lap, her eyes tracing the slow, soft shapes of shadow across the wall. This, too, is part of her ritual. The stillness before sleep. The pause before letting go. She might recall a line from earlier, something nearly finished, or not yet begun. She might let it drift through her like wine through lace, unheld but felt. Then, without drama, she leans forward. Her breath meets the flame, and the room returns to dark. Not a frightening dark, a full one. A quiet sea in which she now floats, unafraid, her breath the only sound. She slips beneath the quilt. The pillow is cool, the sheets soft from many washings. Her eyes close slowly, not shut against the world, but turned inward, toward dreams, toward mystery, toward the pages that remain unwritten. And so, dear dreamer, as the house grows utterly still, and the last of the light slips away, Emily Dickinson, the poet who lived in a room and found the universe there, sleeps. And the stars, patient and faithful, keep watch through her window. The door to her room is closed now. The candle has gone out. The bed, once gently creased by her form, lies still and untouched by waking. The pages on her desk rest without movement. The garden outside whispers only to itself. And yet, the room is not empty. Something remains, something more than the scent of old books and faded lilac. Something more than the desk that settles kindly on the window ledge. It is the presence of attention, of care, of a soul so fully given to its thoughts that even her silence left fingerprints. She is not here. Not in the way she was. Not in the way the town of Amherst ever fully saw her. But her breath, the echo of it, still lingers in these walls. Not just in the rooms, but in the spaces between. In the pauses she carved so deliberately between words. In the dash that carry more emotion than whole paragraphs written by men in loud rooms. Emily Dickinson did not ask to be remembered. She did not shout to be heard. She whispered. And somehow, across centuries, across rooms she never left, across the unopened envelopes of poems folded in her hand, we heard her. We read her. We kept her company. And now, her words live, not just in books, but in quiet hearts. In those of us who've watched the light shift on the floor and felt something stir. In those who sit beside windows, not to look out, but to see within. Her room is dark. But the poems, dear dreamer, are bright. They glow, not with grandeur, but with precision. With that singular light that shines only when a soul tells the truth, even in secret. And so, as the house breathes its night breath and the stars continue their tireless watch, Emily's absence becomes its own kind of presence. Not haunting, holding, like a hand that never fully lets go. Shall we, dear dreamer, rest now with her, in the last hush of night, before the dawn comes once more to call her name in light? Morning will come soon. The sky, though still draped in night, carries the faintest prelude of dawn, not visible yet, but sensed. The stars, once bright and boasting, begin to fade. Not in defeat, but in reverence. Something else is coming. And inside the Dickinson home, all is still. Emily sleeps. Her face, though unseen, is familiar to us now, not by appearance, but by expression, by the way her thoughts moved, by the quiet places she carried, by the fierce tenderness of her mind. The room, her sanctuary, rests with her. The paper waits. The garden sleeps. The white dress is folded on the chair, as if she had only stepped out for a moment. But she is not gone. Not in the way the world so often means it. She remains, in ink yes, but also in air. In the stillness before thought. In the hush before a word is spoken. In the slant of light on a bare floor. In the truth we dare to whisper only to ourselves. Emily Dickinson did not leave behind a statue, or a grand estate, or a public name worn proudly in her lifetime. She left behind something more delicate, more enduring, a map of how to see the soul inside a bee, how to hear the sound of silence, how to speak in dashes and know the sentence is still whole. She lived as few have dared, invisibly yet completely. And now, dear dreamer, as you lie with eyes half closed and breast slowed, you have walked with her. You have seen her world not through biography, but through belonging. You know now the weight of her quiet, the rhythm of her days, the glow of her lamp. And so, as our story draws to a close and the stars retreat, may you carry her with you, not just in name, but in practice. In the way you notice a shadow, in the way you pause before speaking, in the way you let a poem form slowly, without needing it to impress. Emily Dickinson once wrote, "I could not stop for death. He kindly stopped for me. But even death, dear dreamer, could not stop her voice. It lives still. It whispers. It waits. And now, as we two prepare to rest, may we do so as she did, with grace, with wonder, and with an open window to the stars. If this story brought you comfort, if Emily Dickinson's quiet world stirred something still and familiar within your soul, consider leaving a little echo below. A like, a comment, a quiet click on the subscribe button. It helps me know that somewhere, someone is still listening. And before the light of dawn begins to rise, I want to ask you this. When do you feel most like Emily Dickinson? Is it when you're alone with your thoughts? When you write something no one else will read? Or when you quietly notice a flower blooming for no reason at all? I'd love to hear from you, in your own quiet way, here in this shared space we've woven together. Rest well, dear dreamer. Until next time, Crescent Moon.